Elon Musk going after Trump and the Republicans in a way that could really matter beyond just tweeting or talking. He is vowing to now begin a new political party that would compete with the Republican Party. He says he'll call it the America Party. This Musk announcement comes amidst the break with Trump over the Republican budget, slashing subsidies, including things that Musk wanted that benefit his companies. Trump lashing out further. So the feud that had died down is back this week, saying Musk is off the rails and a train wreck.
I think it's ridiculous to start a third party. Third parties have never worked, so he can have fun with it, but I think it's ridiculous.
I'm back with Mark and Juanita. And Mark, we live in the world as it is and not as it might be. We were just discussing the power of some of these corporations that want to help Trump. Here is someone who has a level of wealth that can dwarf most congressional races, can meaningfully be involved in the presidential race, as he showed last time. Trump says third parties don't work. Political scientists would tell you third parties have often tipped elections, even at the national level. Do you think if he spends on it, that this thing could matter or complicate the GOP's life?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that seems to be what Elon Musk's ideal reality would be here, which is to sort of disrupt what Republicans think, what they need to sort of win and continue to win the House majority and to keep the Senate. But I also think, a lot of the details here are key. I mean, Elon Musk has shown consistently that he's not really much of a detail guy as far as seeing something like this through. I mean, this is going to be requiring a lot of infrastructure, someone to recruit, candidates, get people on the ballot and so forth. I mean, that's a lot of sort of nitty gritty work, which obviously he didn't seem to be too big of a fan of before. So we'll see. I mean, I see why Trump would be ambivalent about it because, I mean, he probably stands to lose more. But I also think that, I have some serious doubts about Elon Musk's ability to actually execute something like this, given his relatively brief and somewhat tumultuous record in politics.
Yeah, I mean, he's a complex figure in that way, Juanita. You can't doubt that he's had impact. He's had huge impacts in fields that he's focused on. But unlike other people that sometimes put decades into something, he has this frenetic, almost ADD style of management. As a Politico yourself, I'm sure you can remind everyone, Juanita, how long-term party building usually takes multiple cycles. That's even when if the Democrats are down a little bit and they're trying to fight back in Virginia or North Carolina, and that's a party people are registered in. Here you're asking for a whole new thing.
Not only are you asking for a whole new thing, it goes down to a granular level of hoops that he would have to jump through at the state and local levels in terms of petitions signed by local voters, engagement that's sustained. Candidates would be willing to run under his banner even, and then you bring in the entire concept of the federal election commissions and legal responsibilities and requirements and filings. I don't think he has the stomach for the long game, as Mark mentioned. But also, Ari, I got to jump back to something we talked about last time I was on with Jason Johnson, when he's like, why is a billionaire able to even influence elections this way? It does hearken to the devastating state of our democracy at present and how much farther it stands to decline if someone like Elon Musk continues to throw around his wealth and his billions in this game, when the reality is that real people's lives and well-being are on the line with every single election.
Yeah, Mark, how about that? I mean, we live our lives mostly through stories, not statistics. If the story becomes enough billionaires that are overreaching and upsetting to enough people, does that catalyze some concern that Juanita mentions? That a heck of a lot of people left, right, and center don't think other people, whether they made a lot of money or moved here from wherever, should be running everything just because they're rich.
You would think. I mean, I do think, look, I mean, it's unclear how much money, if any, Elon Musk is going to put into this. I mean, right now, his big interest, or at least his big success, has been to trigger Donald Trump. I mean, Donald Trump obviously doesn't like that he's doing this. And I think Elon Musk probably, is getting a kick out of that fact alone. Look, I think people don't like rich, billionaires getting involved in politics, but it's never stopped them before. It certainly didn't stop them in the last election. And there's really not been an election where you can point to money in politics sort of being the main issue. I mean, yes, John McCain has, that was sort of his signature when he first started running, his fundraising reform bill, which was a huge issue, but it hasn't really gotten traction, certainly not since the Supreme Court ruled, in favor of just super PACs and the unlimited money being allowed to be spent on campaigns. So look, right now, I mean, I think it's sort of a distraction, and it's also hard to imagine a serious politician running in congressional district X on the America Party because he or she is very, very compelled by Elon Musk's vision for the future. I mean, I don't see it, but I guess it could happen in the next year and a half sometime.